Hello and welcome back to the Toffee Blues YouTube channel, your source for all things Everton. My name is Thomas Robertson, joined today by the Esk Paul. We are going to be talking about ownership once again. I mean, I don't know how many conversations we've had about this now. Plenty, plenty of months worth of rumours that we could get into, but one pretty predominant one this week in reference to John Textor from Crystal Palace. We'll also have a quick discussion about the state of play with 777 a couple of days ahead of the agreement expiring. But first off, Paul, thank you very much for joining me. How are you doing?
Yeah, not bad at all, thanks. Really interesting time, obviously, with Everton. One would have hoped, given that we finished 14 points above the relegation spot, in a very comfortable 15th position, we would all be sitting back and relaxing, waiting for the transfer window to open and for floods of new players to come in. But it appears that that's not going to be the case.
No, definitely not. And I think we'll have to get used to that for a little while. I mean, I couldn't believe last year when we were spending money on Beto and Chimiti seemingly having none. I know that they were all deferred payments to this year, but still, even agreeing to pay that money seemed a bit ridiculous. But surely now we've reached a point this summer where we can't even be doing that, and it will be just loans and free transfers and basically seeing who's out there.
I think so. I mean, the purchases that we made last summer, the first payments fall due this month. So, well, actually, sorry, fall due in June. So, uh, Everton have got quite a lot of cash to find over and above like the normal amount of cash that they need to find for the stadium and for the running of the football club. So, it's going to be quite a tricky time, and obviously with the ownership issues not having been resolved, makes it even more difficult. So the chances, and I hate to be like the harbinger of doom, but the chances of us retaining the players that we want to retain and adding to the squad are very, very limited.
Yeah, and I mean, in an ideal world, we'd keep the likes of Jared Branthwaite. I think that's looking increasingly unlikely to happen. I'm sure kind of everyone made their peace with that, but we're in an incredibly difficult position now as well. That it's not, it's not just that we're going to have to sell these players to make up funds to buy others. Those funds won't necessarily go on other players, and also other clubs know that we have to sell. So we're in a very tricky position bargaining wise when trying to get a good fee for our best players.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we are, without over egging it, we're in the worst possible position where everybody knows the position that Everton are in, and it's going to be difficult. It's going to be really difficult for us to get any form of deals that, in other circumstances, where we would get much better. So Sean Dyche and Kevin Thelwell have really got their work cut out. Not least, of course, because those players who are currently at the club will want to know with some certainty what the future of the club is, whether or not they want to continue, even though most of them might no doubt thoroughly enjoy playing for Everton and love the relationship that they have with fans, whether or not Everton still represents the best opportunities for their careers, given the ownership and the resource situation that we have. And equally, that applies to incoming players as well, where agents have it's often forgotten that agents have a duty of care towards their clients in terms of recommending clubs to them. And part of that recommendation has to be the stability and the future of the future direction of the club. And even with the bluest of blue tinted spectacles, it's difficult to present a wholly coherent and positive argument at this moment in time.
Which definitely bodes well for the summer. But before we even have to consider the transfer window, the ownership is the more pressing matter. So we may as well start off with 777. Of course, I mean, we've spoken about this at length for months and months. It seemingly was all coming to an end. It looked like the deal wasn't going to go through. Of course, it still does. Um, but tell us a bit about what happened a couple of weeks ago when this agreement to buy the club was seemingly extended. There was a lot of conflicting rumors about some people saying that was always going to be the case, some people saying that, this was an added extension. What generally what happened there, and why did it kind of catch the fans off guard when seemingly the deal was dead in the water?
Well, my understanding is that there were two critical points, as you say, a couple of weeks ago. One was the what's become known as a share purchase agreement between Moshiri and 777, and that's a document that says that 777 agreed to buy Everton and agreed to fund Everton until such a time as they acquire Moshiri's shares. And obviously, as everybody has now discussed for months on end, as you say, all of that was subject to approval from the Premier League and subject to 777 being able to demonstrate that they had the funds, first of all, to acquire the club, secondly, to pay off some of the creditors that wanted to be paid off, and thirdly, provide the money for the club going forwards. Now, self-evidently, 777 haven't been able to do that, and as this year in particular has gone on, there's become more and more evidence of the problems that 777 as a business faces, resulting obviously in the court case in New York. And it has to be said that these are only allegations at this stage, where a UK-based, a London-based investor has taken 777 to court, claiming that the security that that 777 provided for £350 million worth of loans to 777 actually had been pledged elsewhere. So they're now in a position where they're trying to recover either the security or try and recover the cash. And of course, once one major creditor does that, every other creditor of 777, it's not really related to Everton, but it is in a sense. Then every other creditor of 777 jumps on the same bandwagon and says, well, hang on a minute, we thought we had security, or we thought we had primacy in this case, which is ACAP's argument, for example. So there's an almighty battle going on in the Southern District of New York court over A, who is the most senior of the people that are owed money by 777, and B, what security they have over those debts. And that case is continuing. It should have been an announcement yesterday, but that's actually now been extended back to June the 3rd. And so we just watch that, with interest. What it means for Everton, of course, is that there's absolutely no prospect at all of 777 being able to complete the deal with Everton, or with Farhad Moshiri more accurately. And that deal, the SPA, runs out on the 31st of May. And when that runs out, a number of things will happen. First of all, Moshiri is then able to speak to other parties. So the exclusivity agreement that's contained within the SPA falls, so he can talk to other parties. And secondly, both 777 and 777's creditors, because they're already in a form of administration, although not as we see it in the UK as administration, they're going to want their money back, because we owe them roughly £200 million, and those people will be seeking a return of those funds, because quite clearly they're not going to buy Everton Football Club, and therefore it now becomes a debt, and they will seek whatever the loan agreement is. They will seek as quick a recovery of that money as possible, and Everton clearly can't provide that money without a new owner coming in. And then even then, when a new owner comes in, it's questionable as to whether the new owner would want to return all of those monies to 777.
Yeah, which, I mean, I'm going to say it bodes well for the summer about a million times, but it's not just about the summer, is it? It's about the future of the club. And why? I mean, I'm sure no one really knows the answer, the sole answer to this. I'm sure there are a range of answers, but why has this takeover been allowed to drag on for so long, when seemingly the writing's been on the wall to anyone with eyes, basically, over the last couple of months?
Well, ultimately it's down to Farhad Moshiri, and it's just another example of his appalling judgment. he determined back in September of last year, and publicly stated that these were the best and most suitable, after a long period of like due diligence. These were the best people to buy Everton Football Club, and in a sense that they were the best people if they could do it for Farhad Moshiri, because they were the people who were actually offering him some cash up front for his shareholding. His debt was going to be wiped out, but he was going to get, according to the Premier League's papers, something approaching £65 million for his shares initially, and that might have grown to 130 million over a period of time. So it was clear to him, at least, that 777 represented the best opportunity to sell the club. But as more and more people looked into 777, and as 777's own problems accelerated, it became very, very obvious that they weren't the right people. And the nature of the contract that Moshiri signed with 777 meant that it was very difficult for him to get out of the situation. So, we've been bound to 777 up to the point where the shareholder purchase or the share purchase agreement falls, which is at the end of this week.
And when that does fall, we are now starting to realistically think about different owners. And I mean, there's been plenty reported over the past couple of months by the likes of yourself, by the likes of Paul Brown, about potential parties that are interested aside from 777. But one that's really dramatically emerged over the last week, and I think it was initially in The Athletic, was John Textor from Crystal Palace. So could you just start off by giving us a bit of context about where that came from, what that story was, and where on earth has this all come from?
Well, it's a real mystery as to why John Textor came out and said what he said. John Textor is an interesting character. Okay, he's obviously he's American. He's somewhat larger than life, and he has a desire to sort of be in the media quite a bit. Let's put it that way. So if media people want a quote from somebody, John's your man to call, and he will willingly provide that. And it's been known within football that, actually, let's take a step back. So what does he own? Well, he has a company called Eagle Holdings, which is the largest single shareholder in Crystal Palace. So that he owns 45% of Crystal Palace. And then you've got people that most people will have heard of, a guy called Harris, a guy called Blitzer, and a guy called Steve Parish, who is probably the most public, or at least the person that most people in the UK certainly would recognise. Between them, they own 55% of Crystal Palace, and sorry, my name's gone. Textor owns 45%. So he owns a massive stake in Crystal Palace, but he doesn't have control of Crystal Palace. And it's been known in football for quite some time, probably more than a year, that he was a willing seller of his Crystal Palace stake. But he's not had any real interest from other investors in buying it, for the simple reason that you're buying nearly half of the club, but you're not buying any control, because the three other investors, actually three others and a couple of very small investors, have majority control of the club. Crystal Palace are a decent club, obviously London based. They've got planning permission to redevelop the main stand, which would make it obviously a much more attractive club going forward. The funding of the redevelopment of the main stand wouldn't be an issue, because each of the shareholders have sufficient resources of their own to meet the cost of that stadium. But the issue is, because nobody's got overall control of Crystal Palace, it's very difficult actually to do something without getting the agreement of all the parties. So Textor has been trying to sell that stake for quite some time without any success. He's also got stakes, of course, elsewhere. The biggest stake is a French club in Lyon, which, to be fair to him, hasn't done too badly. And that's backed by a company called Ares, Ares, which is also ultimately one of the backers of Bowley's purchase of Chelsea. So it's a really complex situation. But the big issue is, why does Textor feel the need to come out publicly now and say, first of all, he's trying to sell his Palace shares, but secondly, then say, the reason why I'm selling my Palace shares is because I want to buy Everton Football Club. That significantly reduces his bargaining ability or his bargaining power with the sale of the Crystal Palace shares, because any would-be buyer, and as I say, he's, for more than 12 months he's been trying to sell these shares. Any would-be buyer recognises that in order to buy Everton, because he wants to buy Everton, he has to sell Crystal Palace or his Crystal Palace holdings. And so the price that he's likely to get for that holding drops straight away, because people recognise in a sense he's a forced seller. So it's difficult to see how and why. Well, first of all, it's difficult to see why he said what he said, if he had any real intent of doing it. And if he does have a real intent of doing it, and I know he's had conversations, whether that meeting that was alleged to have happened in Spain with Moshiri, Andy Bell and George Downing actually happened or not, I'm not exactly sure. It just seems to me like an impossible situation, because he can't come forward with Everton without selling his Palace shares. He's been unable to sell them for the last 12 months, and now he's given the reason why he wants to sell them, i.e. buying Everton. That makes the sale more difficult as well. So it's a really odd one. Obviously the media have picked up on it, and the media loves stories like this because, as I say, he's a larger than life character. He's got football interests elsewhere. He's certainly wealthy enough to buy Everton, although whether he's wealthy enough to do everything that needs to be done with Everton once he's bought them is questionable. But it comes back to the fact that he's locked in. He's effectively locked in as a Crystal Palace shareholder, and until he resolves that issue, then this is going nowhere. My fear is that this is just it's just another story that doesn't provide a solution. So in the same way that 777 were a story that didn't provide a solution, and in fact made Everton's position worse, potentially getting into bed with somebody like Textor is just a continuation of the same theme.
You said that you're confused about why he's come out in the media in this way. What could he possibly be trying to gain by doing this? Is it purely just, I mean, is it just ego driven? He wants his name in the press. What is the possible gain from going about it this way?
It's really difficult to work out exactly what his motive is. He has from what I know, he has quite a difficult relationship with the Ares, the company that backed his purchase of Olympique Lyonnais. Whether that changes if he manages to sell Crystal Palace and manage to buy Everton or not, just conjecture on my part. That's the only real reason I can think. Yeah, it's baffling. I mean, I've spoken to a number of people in the City of London who are involved in football acquisitions and financing football acquisitions in the last few days. Well, I've been speaking to some for a while, obviously, with regards to Everton, and they're all equally puzzled. Even people that know him personally, are puzzled as to why he's actually come out and said what he said.
Andy Bell and George Downing are two names that have been coming up time and time again. Is it becoming a safe assumption that they will have some involvement in the club going forward?
I think it's difficult to reach that conclusion, to be honest. I think until such a time as there's a long-term owner of the football club, i.e. not just a temporary solution, they have to be involved because they're significant creditors to the club. They're owed a significant amount of money, and they will clearly want to have that money returned to them, A, as quickly as possible, and B, as much of it as they possibly can. So I think their involvement will continue until such a time as they're repaid. But they're only going to get repaid if there's a proper owner that comes in. It's not just a temporary measure. It's somebody that actually comes in and can fund not only the purchase, whatever they end up paying. They end up paying Moshiri, which is going to be minimal, if anything. But do all the other things that they have to do. The big problem for Everton is not that Everton itself is not an unattractive club. It's a very attractive club, obviously. The stadium itself might be an attraction if the financing of the stadium can be sorted out properly. The big issue for any would-be buyer of Everton at this moment in time, now we've got through the season, obviously the relegation issue has disappeared, at least for another season. But the big issue is the incredible amount of debt that the club is carrying, and the cost of that debt. We are, and I've seen people to try and dispute these figures on social media. We're carrying, if you include the 777 debt, around about £580 million worth of third-party debt at the moment, and that's. I don't know what the 777 interest rate is, but the interest rate on the other debt is at or around about 10%. That suggests that maybe we're spending around about £1 million a week, maybe slightly more, on interest costs, and that's on a business that only turns over £180 million. So nearly a third, certainly 30%. Of what the club earns in revenue is currently being spent on interest payments, and that's not sustainable going forwards. It's been a problem, as we all know, for many years, but it's a problem that's only accelerated because of Moshiri's agreement to sell to 777, and then 777's inability to complete the deal, but also the fact that they've actually provided the additional funding that the club has needed in the period that they tried to get the deal over the line. So it is, and it sounds horribly pessimistic, and it might sound somewhat boring to some people because it's been said so frequently now. It is just a horrific mess, and it's a mess that is where the blame of it lies just at the door of one man, Farhad Moshiri.
Yeah, and just to round us off then, because of course it is all still rumours at the moment, and before we get anything concrete, it'll be tricky to go into much further. But now this agreement is going to expire in the next couple of days from when we're recording. Who knows? Maybe there'll be a magical extension again, but I think that's highly unlikely. With Textor at play, I mean, there's been plenty of talk about other potential investors from America. Look, the 777 takeover, it's obviously stretched out for so long and ultimately won't go anywhere, but that's not the normal timeline for a takeover. What can we expect in the summer now? Do you expect us to have new owners by the start of next season?
No, I don't actually. And in fact, I wrote an article a couple of days ago saying that effectively Moshiri will now just kick the can down the road. And why will he do that? Well, first of all, there is no obvious new owner unless there's a massively different. Apologies for the noise if you can hear noise in the background. Unless there's a massive change of attitude with regards to the creditors, i.e. the people that are owed money. Each of the creditors believe that they have sufficient security to get all of the money that's owed to them paid back to them at some point in the future, preferably sooner rather than later. I question whether that's actually true or not. But the big point about it is that no future buyer of the club is going to be prepared to pay everybody back everything that's owed. So until such a time as that happens, we're not going to find a buyer. So how does Moshiri continue to run the club when he's not going to put any more money in, and 777 are not going to put any more money in? You do what every other company does that finds itself in that position where they can't borrow more and they don't have any more cash, is that they have to sell some assets. And unfortunately, and again, I know it sounds horribly negative, unfortunately, the only answer to Everton's short-term problems will be to sell players, and will be to sell players very early in the transfer window. So A, we generate cash, B, we reduce our costs a little bit, and C, in all likelihood, it will protect us from any future PSR breaches for the season 23-24, which is still a consideration. So I would expect the transfer window opens on June the 14th. I would expect there to be some activity and players leaving the club, and some of the players that we would not want to leave the club before the end of June.
Brilliant. So, summer of sales, not of the club though. That won't. We don't expect that to happen before the start of next season. Players are going to have to go out, not necessarily to be replaced, mainly to keep the lights on and keep the bills paid. That's what we can expect coming up in the summer. We'll have to keep an eye on the John Textor rumours and any other rumours that might come out after this week. As I mentioned, after that agreement has expired, I'm sure there'll be slightly more activity than we've seen over the past couple of days. But Paul, thank you very much for your time as always.
No, it's a pleasure, and I'm sorry. I wish I could offer better news or brighter prospects, but at this moment in time, I can't. So I just have to say it as it is, and I appreciate not everybody either agrees or wants to hear what I've got to say, but nevertheless, this is what I believe, and it's most of it is evidence based. So it is very unfortunate, but I think we have to face reality as fans.
Yeah, no problem at all. Sometimes the most important information is the hardest to hear. Thank you all very much for listening. Be sure to check out Paul's social media in the description below. Check out the rest of the videos on the YouTube channel as well, as mentioned. Thank you very much for listening, and join us next time on the Toffee Blues. Goodbye.